Our speaker today is a visionary leader. Dr. Cynthia Hornberger has guided new ways of thinking and doing at Washburn University since 1989. Her professional accomplishments, awards, honors, and scholarships are expansive and recognized globally. They include her role as Washburn University Special Assistant to the President and Dean of the School of Nursing, and a board member at St. Francis Health. Dr. Hornberger earned her PhD, MBA, and Masters of Science in Nursing at KUMC. However, her home university is Washburn University, where she earned her BSN. Her scholarship includes multiple international presentations and publications on leadership of dynamic systems. However, Dr. Hornberger's accomplishments are limited in their ability to demonstrate the deep well of her vision. Few of us at Washburn University know of her ability and her skills as a master gardener to create beautiful healing spaces, or her ability to knit homespun wool into works of wearable art. I share these examples with you because each illustrates her unique ability to draw from that deep well to create meaning in dynamic systems and that extend far beyond her professional environment. The space between her personal and professional life is where her visionary leadership emerges. Using mindfulness, creativity, and curiosity, Dr. Hornberger embodies the art and science of nursing and is a true visionary leader. Please welcome Dr. Cynthia Hornberger.
All right. It's nice to see so many of you in here. Good afternoon to the faculty, students, staff, administration, guests, and a lot of good friends. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed the presentation as much as I enjoyed putting it together. Let's see here. I was born in Texas, but raised close by in Lawrence, Kansas. As the oldest child of 6, I learned responsibility early from 2 hardworking parents. Similar to Dr. Farley, my father owned a small gas station. Both my mother and father were frustrated by their lack of college education, and they set the goal for each of their children to complete a university degree. I enjoyed school and did as they requested, eventually collecting 5 degrees. My husband, Steve, was truly worried I would never stop being a graduate student. I have been fortunate to have 2 professional passions, nursing and higher education. I spent nearly 30 years at Washburn, 2.5 as a transfer student in the 70s, and 27 as a faculty member and administrator. On a personal note, I have been married 37 years to Steve Hornberger and have 2 sons, Ryan and Jeff, and a wonderful new daughter-in-law, Jen. My hobbies are numerous, and some of them are listed. When Sean invited me to give the last lecture, he suggested I could talk about anything. How broad is that? Thanks for many sleepless nights in the last 6 months. Here are his suggestions that guided my presentation. First, what have I learned? Secondly, what is worth sharing or could be shared? And last, how do you want the information to be used? Reflecting on my life, I decided to categorize my presentation using 4 aspects of my life: nursing, leading, teaching, and creating. Nursing. Once I reached the age of 18, my focus was to learn a profession. I wandered a bit in undergraduate school, first aiming for medicine, then human development, where I worked as a work-study student for 4 years, almost chemistry, and finally nursing. I chose nursing based on a life experience watching my grandfather being cared for in an early cardiac intensive care unit. It seemed to me the nurses combined my interest in science with my compassion for humankind. I was a senior at KU, and I made a site visit to Washburn University to meet the chair of a new department of nursing. Her name was Dr. Alice Adam, and she changed my life. After meeting her, I decided to get my BSN at Washburn, and I never applied anywhere else. After completing my BA in Human Development, I arrived on Washburn's campus in August 1976, spending the next 2.5 years learning the art and science of nursing. I graduated in December 1978 with my BSN. Leading. My first real job as an RN was at Lawrence Memorial Hospital in the emergency department. I had worked there during my senior year in nursing school as a nursing assistant, and I already knew I loved the pace and the variety of the work. I was fortunate to have an outstanding head nurse, Adele Allen. Adele was my first professional mentor, and she taught me leadership and much more about nursing. I already was attracted to leadership, and within a few years I became the assistant head nurse of the unit. In these years I had my first experiences as a professional leader. Teaching. After 8 years as an ER nurse, I was disillusioned with the bureaucracy of healthcare, and I wanted more. I started back to school to get my MSN. After finishing, I was offered a job by my second mentor, now Dean Alice Adam Young, in 1989. My adventure in teaching began. I started as an instructor teaching nursing fundamentals, health assessment, and professional nursing leadership. Over the next 10 to 15 years, I added courses in medical surgical nursing, emergency nursing, and graduate courses in nursing research, leadership, health policy, and global health. At the same time, I started and completed a PhD in nursing. Soon I would accept the role as dean of the school, and eventually I finished my career at Washburn as special assistant to the president and professor in the School of Nursing. For all but one semester, I taught at least one course at the undergraduate or graduate level. In latter years, I experienced team teaching outside of my discipline and created study abroad experiences in China, Europe, and Central America. Creating. Creating has always been a part of my life. As you will soon hear, creativity is an important thread connecting me to people and places. I am happiest when I am creating. As most of you know, Washburn in the 70s was a commuter campus. I fit right in. I drove a yellow Dodge Dart over from Lawrence every day for 2.5 years to complete my BSN. My only extracurricular activities centered around the nursing department, and I was an active member of SNO, the Student Nurses of Washburn. To pay for my education, I had a modest scholarship, and I worked as a waitress, and later as a certified nursing assistant to put myself through school. Washburn in the 1970s was focused on getting an education that would result in getting a job. I came to Washburn as a transfer student, and most of my classmates were like me. The class had 23 students, with 4 of them men, very unusual for this time period. Over half the class were 25 years or older, and all were excellent students. The oldest student was in his 50s. His name was Frank. Interestingly, everyone in my class graduated, and all but one finished with the cohort they started with. Our teachers were idealistic, smart nurses who believed in the Rogerian framework and the baccalaureate educational pathway. To them, I am forever grateful. In these years, I refined my ability to think critically and act as an accountable professional. My worldview broadened, and I was excited to lead. Nursing has impacted my life in a profound way. It is an honor to be with people as they experience great highs and great lows of life. Nursing is challenging, mentally and physically. Nursing is diverse and creative, and it is frustrating and manipulated by the system. As is often the case, I didn't plan to work in the ER. When I was a senior in nursing school and wanting more experience before graduating, the only CNA job was in the ER. I worried I wouldn't be able to handle it. On the first day on the job, a man had fallen into a vat of hot tar, came in, and I spent the entire afternoon debriding the skin off his arms. I decided after that day I could make it. ER nurses often rotate day and night shifts. Very soon one realized that more action occurred in the evening and night hours. I wouldn't understand then what I was feeling while I was in charge on the evening shift in the ER. One never knew how the shift would evolve. Perhaps it would be a steady stream of regular patients, lacerations, sprains, chest pain, trouble breathing. Or it might be a special night, where multiple cars were involved in an accident on the interstate, or we had an ice storm with people streaming in with fractures. Or maybe it would just be dead quiet, because KU was in a tournament game and no one wanted to miss it. really happened. But on those crazy nights, something special happened. The ER was overflowing, and people everywhere were very sick. The team would become an orchestra, with everyone knowing their part and everyone else's part. Time would change pace, and things got very fast. Staff was hyper-aware, and they understood the simple rules. It was a joy to experience, and I still miss it. Sometimes, however, it wasn't exciting, but certainly unusual. That's a catfish head stuck on a person's heel. Working in the ER increased my awareness of the potentiality of disaster events. During my years there, I was involved in 2 mass casualty events, a train derailment, and an F2 tornado, which, by the way, blew my house away while I was working in the ER. We practiced continuously for a hazardous materials spill as well. And while I have highlighted my 10 years in the ER, I had similar challenging and exhilarating experiences working as a home health nurse and as a cardiac rehab nurse. My second area of learning came from leading. Chronologically, I was learning leading before nursing, as each of us is asked to lead from a young age. Here are a few ways that I have had the opportunity to lead. Our Leadership Institute has used this framework to describe leadership development. In this room today, we have new and matured leaders. Note the word matured. Each of us, however, is in a continual state of leadership development. As a nurse, I initially learned leadership theory in class. Our professors understood nurses lead a team of caregivers to optimize the health and well-being of the patients they care for. I had many defining moments as a student nurse and as a young ER nurse. What I didn't understand is the dynamic nature of my understanding of leadership. I initially learned and experienced leadership as command and control. Not an uncommon mistake, but a painful one. As my self-awareness grew through lived experiences and additional instruction in leadership, I was committed to change through personal development. I did a lot of on-the-job relational training over the years. Simultaneously, one develops oneself as leader and develops skills in leadership. I believe that leaders are developed through a combination of education, experience, and empowerment. I recognize leaders have a responsibility and an obligation to develop future leaders, and I am proud that I have been involved in doing so. 2 assumptions guide one's leadership development. The first principal foundation of leadership is the umbrella of self-awareness, defined within the context of one's individual worldview. The second principal foundation of leadership is the idea that individuals operate within a multiple of systems that are larger than themselves, and the ability to do so is established through the development of one's global mindset. It is this combination of worldview and global mindset that establishes the overarching platform for one's leadership. I'm just going to click this stuff all up there. What is the distinction between leaders and leadership? I borrow this content from an excellent lecture given by Michael Gleason. He shares a quote from Warren Bennis. In building the leadership capacity necessary continually to reinvent themselves, organizations need to attend to both the individual leader and collective leadership development. Leader development can be interpreted as a form of individual-based differentiation in terms of helping individuals enhance a unique self-understanding and to construct an individual independent identity as leader. Leadership development can be thought of as an integration strategy by helping people understand how they relate to others, coordinate their efforts, build commitments, and develop extended social networks by applying self-understanding to social and organizational imperatives. So a global mindset is our systematic understanding of culture and connected leadership. It is the foundation for systematic leadership. It represents individuals, groups, organizations, and systems both similar and different than those one is associated with. How we struggle with this at the moment. We must recognize that we are involved in multiple systems at any one point in our lives and are continuously moving out of old systems and into new systems. These systems include our social and family systems, where we live, and the organizations to which we belong or work. Our global mindset recognizes that all of these systems are larger than us, have histories that precede us, and will outlive us. This is the concept of scale. A worldview is an individual's comprehensive framework of basic beliefs which essentially determine how a person understands, feels, and responds in action. It provides meaning such that it defines one's map of reality. A worldview functions as a person's individualized model of how things are in the world and how they should be. And your worldview impacts your leadership. It influences your attitudes towards authenticity and what it means to be a leader. It defines whether it is more important to focus on the group or on the individual. It highlights what characteristics are desired in a leader, which varies from culture to culture. You know, I didn't plan to teach. I was still working in the ER and just finished my master's in nursing. My dad was ill. He had had a GI bleed and I was spending the night in ICU. Being a good nurse daughter, I packed an overnight bag and planned to special him by sleeping in a chair in his room. I took my knitting, of course, and my Kansas Nurse magazine to pass the time. While reading it that night, I happened to see that Washburn was advertising a teaching position starting in the fall. On a whim, I called the nursing department the next morning and Dr. Young said she would interview me that day if I could come over with my resume and transcript. I made it there that afternoon, and before I knew it, I was sitting in the conference room with her and Lois Rimmer, Susan Shaw, Carolyn Kyle, and Aletha Cushenberry. Freak out. My 4 hardest teachers and my chair in school. After a terrifying interview, they said they would get a hold of me in a week. I took the follow-up call from an airport telephone in Chicago. Guess what? They offered me a job. Once I began my career at Washburn, my purpose grew. I loved working with students and grew amazed at the opportunities to create learning experiences. Washburn was a supportive and creative environment for me to learn to teach. My leadership grew these years both in the classroom and as an active faculty member. Dr. Young recognized my interest in leadership and mentored me. She provided opportunities to learn and scale up to responsibilities beyond the school as representative to various university committees. I was the president of our honor society when we became a chapter at large. This broadened my horizon of nursing scholarship and nursing education worldwide. After finishing my PhD, I soon became the dean of the school with big responsibilities. There was a lot to learn now. I went to Fort Lewis with the new Associate Dean, Ellen Carson, and I participated in what the Army nurse cadets experienced to prepare them for military leadership. I helped students move in, celebrate Washburn events, have fun, and graduate. We created new courses, new graduate programs, and strengthened existing international ties. I am most proud of the work to help our faculty attain their terminal degrees and the subsequent growth of our school. Leading was seat of the pants, part scholarly reference, part fractal modeling of others that I admired, and part long talks with Steve. It was hard work. It was rewarding work. During these years, I moved from command and control to leading with networks. But interestingly, not everyone in our team wanted the shared responsibility of leadership. And I often didn't want to give up the power. No secret here. The best reward in teaching is seeing others achieve their goal. I was so fortunate to work with students over 3 decades. I now know teaching is a partnership, a network of giving and receiving. Soon I would come to understand this as emergence and self-organization. 3 programs I am particularly proud of as part of my teaching and leading lives. First is the TAD program, Transatlantic Double Degree Program. TAD provided our nursing students with the exceptional opportunity to study abroad while expanding their worldview and global mindset. The second is the co-creation of the Leadership Washburn program. Nearly 150 staff, administrators, and faculty had the opportunity to learn about themselves, about Washburn, and about leadership. Finally, my latest opportunity to enhance leadership development was the co-creation with Dr. Shirley Dinkle of a global leadership course for doctoral nursing students that offered the real opportunity to expand their worldview and global mindset while experiencing primary care in Guatemala. By 2000, I had a voracious curiosity about leadership and healthcare reform. I read a seminal book called Crossing the Quality Chasm, which described in detail the horrific truth about poor healthcare quality. In the book's appendix, Paul Pilsick stated the only way to improve healthcare quality was to embrace the principles of complexity science. I hadn't heard of this science, and I began a long-lasting search to learn more. When I found the Plexus Institute, I found the resources I needed to better understand the world I practiced in and now would be teaching students. Kurt Lindberg, the then president of the Plexus Institute, became my third mentor. My introduction to complexity was a lecture given by Kurt at the KU Medical Center in the early 2000s. He'd been a hospital CEO whose hospital was plagued with the reoccurring quality issues of that time: nosocomial infections, medication errors, interprofessional conflicts. His discovery of complexity helped him improve the quality of the hospital's care. So much so, he and others were compared to share their learnings. This photo is a Mandelbrot set, which demonstrates the characteristic of complex systems of self-similarity. In a complex adaptive system, agents within systems spontaneously self-organize and adapt to produce a dynamic state that is neither chaotic nor ordered. Self-organization spontaneously occurs and outcomes emerge that are highly dependent on the relationships and context rather than on the parts. To grasp this terminology, I found 2 concepts helpful. First, the comparison of simple, complicated, and complex systems, with examples provided by the author Brenda Zimmerman. Simple systems are those that behave in predictable ways that can be described in linear relationships. Simple systems are composed of agents that cannot adapt to changes in the environment. The example is baking a cake. Complicated systems are bundles of simple systems. There's more steps and stages, but still they respond linearly. An example is building a rocket. Complex systems are those that behave in often unpredictable ways that are better described using multiplicative models. Complex systems demonstrate adaptation through interaction of agents. Example, raising a child. Beginning in the 1950s, a body of evidence was indicating that some systems did not behave as predicted using linear models. While no theory of complexity exists, a set of principles have been observed. This slide is attributed to Dr. Bruce West of the Mathematical and Information Science Directorate of the Army Research Office of the United States. I found it very helpful in the beginning to compare where I was and where I wanted to go. Take a look at this slide and figure out, how do you really expect the world to function? Are you still assuming a simple system worldview? Or do you recognize that the most of the world is complex? Let me clarify the behavior of linear versus multiplicative or dynamic logarithmic models of system behavior. In the simple linear modeling on your left, X amount of energy or effort yields Y amount of output. With a few data points, one can model the slope of the line and understand how much effort will be required to get a certain output. The mindset is one that I have had most of my life. The more you do, the more you get. In a complex multiplicative model, the slope is not a straight line. In fact, in the lower left corner of the right model, early extra efforts yield very little or no increase in Y, amount of output. Then the system tips, and we see the exponential increase of output based on a modest increase in effort. Gladwell wrote a book about this in 2000 called The Tipping Point, explaining in lay terms the ways social epidemics occur. Those studying complex systems have aggregated a set of observed principles. Interestingly, as soon as I heard these principles, they resonated with me as they were the principles operating in the world of healthcare. This is what I experienced in those busy nights in the ER. Here, the term, the space between, used in my lecture description, describes the ability of agents within the system to react to others in self-organizing and highly creative patterns. Thus, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. This emergent behavior is determined by a set of simple rules. All of us recognize this as birds in flight. By the way, I went to see the Sandhill cranes this March, and if you haven't done it, you need to go do that. I saw 100,000 cranes land in the evening. Those of us who study complexity recognize emergence and self-organization occurring. These complex patterns are created using a simple set of rules. And those of you in Leadership Washburn know that we talked about what are those simple rules at work here. Basically follow other people, birds, don't hit each other, don't get eaten. It's amazing. Remember, I couldn't remember the principles at play that evening in the ER. Now I can. Diversity. It took a diverse team of professionals to provide the care. Embeddedness. We were part of a larger system of care as well as being composed of many different professionals. Connectedness. Our actions and those of our patients were interconnected. Emergent self-organization. Constant action and reprioritization created an evolving positive and sometimes negative flow of care. Unpredictability. Any minute, another patient might come through the door or a patient would crash. Mindfulness. A mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations, like, I don't have time to go to the bathroom. The best caregivers had this skill. And humility and caring, an out-of-body experience of being a vessel of caregiving without thought of self. Now, you might imagine that I thought I was pretty hot stuff after working in the ER for 10 years. I could as well use my early years of teaching for lessons in complexity. Non-linearity and unpredictability. It always amazed me the difference in learning among the students. Same content, but different absorption. You can throw out cause and effect. Giving up control, power, and selfish expectations are hard for young teachers. Sense-making. Carl Weick defines sense-making as the ongoing retrospective development of plausible images that rationalize what people are doing. To be a good teacher, I had to learn the art of sense-making, particularly in the clinical setting. Adaptive positive deviance, or simply finding a different way that works. Students are masterful at this, and over time I got better at it too. Remember my discussion on learning leadership? As I became more self-aware, I desired to change my leadership. Here are some learnings over the years. Change is ubiquitous and desirable. Control is overrated and ineffective. Emergence is amazing. Self-organization is preferred to force-feeding canned knowledge. Man, is worldview hard to keep current. And scale is essential to problem solving. That's one that I learned later in my career. And the space between. Pay attention to relationships and always try to build better networks. Later in my journey of learning about complexity, I met Bill. Bill was retired from an interesting career in organizational development. His lifetime of experience led him to pursue a PhD in organizational behavior. Along the way, he created a theory of power as it related to accomplishing one's purpose in 3 dimensions of appreciation, influence, and control. One premise of his work is purpose serves as the source of one's power. To understand one's purpose is to exponentially increase one's power, defined as the ability to achieve or accomplish one's goals. While there is not time to expand my discussion of Dr. Smith's theory, a key point I learned was that one needs to operate in all three spheres of control, influence, and appreciation. Unfortunately, many of us get stuck in control. Back to my life journey and my last set of learnings. I now realize life's joy is in creating. My earliest memories of creating are with my grandmother, Grace. She loved all crafts and owned a pottery business. She gardened, sewed, painted, cooked, embroidered, and quilted. She laughed out loud, and she smiled despite growing up poor and then raising her family as a single mother in the Depression. She helped me see the beautiful things in life, and she taught me resilience. One key purpose for me is to create. As I grew up, I looked for my own sources and methods of creativity. I raised children with Steve. I learned to be a wife, a friend, a mother, and a professional. I learned many crafts, and I sought advanced education in business and nursing. My purpose of creating was to make a difference in people's lives. Creativity requires unleashing the potential of the mind to conceive new ideas. How one does this is unique, but the better question to ponder is, do you practice creativity, or are you stuck? I already shared my joy of creating. I want to share my learnings, or lessons, shall we say, and new ways of experiencing complexity. Gardening and cooking have taught me patience and humility. As a gardener, I have experienced all of the complexity principles, certainly unpredictability. Plants these past 3 weeks have experienced 16 degrees and 70 degrees. As a result, I still don't have any asparagus. I don't know yet whether I'll have peaches this year. I might have a bumper crop of tomatoes, or maybe the squash bugs will get all of my zucchini. I learned to cook using a recipe, which we've learned is a simple process. But it depends who's the cook. When I started creating my own derivatives of the recipe, the process became untested and certainly more complicated. Because my creativity gets the best of me, I succeed and fail on a regular basis. But I am more kind to myself, and I worry less about my failures. As a hand spinner, I have become familiar with twist. Twist in fiber creates yarn. Interestingly, twist has a mind of its own, and it goes where it wants to go. It is energy that seeks balance. Too much twist, and your yarn feels hard. Too little twist, and your yarn falls apart. Twist is a metaphor for living at the edge of chaos. Enough turbulence so creativity is enhanced, but not so much to lose focus. Do you all remember that color is energetic waves of light? Very complex and way cool. Right now I'm reading a book called Color, The Natural History of the Palette by Victoria Finley. I highly recommend it. Mindfulness focuses one's awareness on the present moment. I took up learning to watercolor so I could learn to see colors better. When I paint, my breathing slows and my perception much keener. Similarly, the same happens to me when I knit, really. Over the years, I have pondered the importance of meaningfulness in my created works. No one sees an object the same way. My art is messier, more joyful, and more playful as I get older. I love giving away created things. Stephen Hawking, may he rest in peace, stated 20 years ago the 21st century would be the century of complexity. As I prepared for this lecture, I re-entered the literature on complexity. New to me was the notion of the world described by the acronym VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Does that sound familiar? The term originated in the 1990s in the U.S. Army War College to describe global conditions post-Cold War. These are indeed the descriptors of a complex system. As a leader in a complex system, I want to positively impact emergence and self-organization. Now, as you look at your systems, if you would like to lead emergence, identify where opportunity tension exists, i.e. some turbulence. It's okay to create this equilibrium by identifying new sources of energy for your system or increasing the diversity of your network. You need to disseminate critical information. You need to amplify successful actions, and it's interesting, in one of the student presentations today, they talked about amplification, and established new norms and standard operating procedures to maintain that amplification. And then institute stabilizing feedback. I mean, these are just kind of basic steps to keep moving your organization or your system along. As leaders, we want to enhance creativity. Creativity emerges where knowledge as a source of power is shared. Experimentation, trial and error, risk-taking, and failure are expected. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I don't like failure, and I'm leery of risk-taking because the business I operated in was human lives. So again, all these things are tempered by the circumstances in which you practice. But again, you should assess when there's opportunities to loosen up and allow for failure. And I think a very important thing, and I'm going off script here, which I haven't done to this point, but I feel so strongly about it, measure your reactions to others when they fail. This was a big shortcoming for me, and one that I work on very hard now. And then small groups engage with continuous communication, collaboration, interaction. Be there with them, and always remember that diversity is valued. All right, this term generative leadership's been out for a few years. Authors Goldstein, Hazy, and Lichtenstein and others called this model of leadership, as I said, generative leadership, to highlight the process of innovation that is not led by one individual, but emerges through an unfolding series of events at every level of the organization. I mentioned this term before, but I want to take a moment and talk about it a bit more. This past fall, I took a class in painting landscapes in a loose style. Our teacher asked us to make sense of the provided photograph in terms of light, depth, and meaning. Here was my interpretation. Sense-making, as identified by Carl Weick, has been described as the negotiation and creation of meaning or understanding, or the construction of a coherent account of the world. He stated, most organizations face all kinds of unpredictable challenges that place huge demands on people's creativity and imaginations. Executives should fight the tendency to overplan. He suggests these attributes for leaders. Mindfulness, don't blame people, learn from mistakes. In crises, be sure to act in order to think. And improvisation can be a good thing. These may be a little bit gender-dated quotes, but again, these have been used by Dr. Gleason in the past, and they always encourage me to reset my purpose every once in a while, to reflect. So here are some actions to consider. Is it time to refresh your purpose, to think about what is my purpose at this moment? Look for ways in which you can practice creativity, or go back to something that you truly enjoy and you haven't felt like you had the time for. Feel comfortable in releasing power and control. Learn to leverage those complexity principles. They are going to be there and in action regardless if you want them to or not, so learn to work with them. And very, very importantly, that space between, build and nurture networks. Some final thoughts on a short video. Hackett and Wang described ethical leadership as possessing 6 virtues. I don't know why I'm compelled at the moment to talk about ethical leadership. Courage is the first virtue. The ability to act in ways that rise above the expediency of the moment, to capitalize on the power and impact of long-term systemic view. Courage is the capacity to act in a manner that serves the greater good. Temperance is the power to control oneself in ways that lead to moral outcomes and beneficence to all. Justice is the ability to act equitably, to uplift the poor, hear the marginalized, defend those who are often defenseless. Justice is the capacity to use personal and positional power in ways to support right outcomes rather than selfish gain. Prudence is the capacity to leverage wisdom to choose not only what is good for people, planet, and profit, but also what is best. Humanity is the ability to exercise the African principle Ubuntu, meaning I am by virtue of the many. It is reciprocal hospitality and much more. And finally, truthfulness is the capacity to act authentically, to speak honestly, and to strive to do the right, even when those actions may be unpopular or difficult. Humility. Practice it. We don't succeed by ourselves. It happens in the space between. Remember, we need each other. I love this. I'm not even going to describe it. It would take too long, but I couldn't leave it out, and that is embrace being a non-rational human being. Check in with the philosophers for more description. And appreciate twist and scale. These you might not think about, aren't in your pocket today, but they'll be useful. We are an expression of energy. When you have a problem, change the scale of appreciation. And when you do, you might be delighted.
One night I was bored in my apartment and decided to take my telescope out to the sidewalk. The moon was out and I thought, why not? Within a few minutes, people started walking over and asking what this thing was.
Hey, what is that, bro?
It's a telescope. Do you want to check out the moon? Do you want to take a look at the moon?
What is it? It's the moon. Where am I supposed to look?
You're supposed to look right here.
Oh, in there.
Yeah. That's where it all started, and it just sort of went from there.
I'm looking at the moon. Hold on, okay, come on. Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Oh my god!
Oh my God. I can't believe it.
Oh my god. Oh my god. No way.
No way.
No way, that's the moon?
No way.
Yeah, way.
Well, you can see the craters. Yeah. That is so cool.
Oh, stop it!
Get wider.
Whoa!
What?
What? Look at the edge. I want to see more of it. I know.
Holy.
I've never seen this before.
I've never seen this before like this.
Wow, that is intense right there, boy.
Woo! Bro, that look like that's right down the street, man. Man, what you got here, man? That look like that's right down the street.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? It's right.
Is that an actual image of the moon? Is it like a live image?
It's that right there. To be able to see it up close and feel like you could almost reach out and touch it, and that's what makes it real to us.
That is incredible.
I kind of felt like I just landed on the moon.
It makes you realize that we are all on a small little planet, and we all have the same reaction to the universe we live in.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
I think there's something special about that, something unifying. It's a great reminder that we should look up more often.
Thank you for your fabulous lecture. It's going to go down for posterity. Her name's been engraved, the name of her lecture, and it's going to be housed in the School of Nursing for this next year. Please join us. Make your way over to the next room. We've got posters and food. Thank you for coming out.